Hi, my name is Mark J. Judge, and I want my bun to look different than it does, but my hair is a creator of its own destiny, and I'm just along for the ride. Let's talk about writer's block. Now, this video is going to be pertaining to D&D 5e, as is on brand with this channel, and I am just going to give you 5 quick sort of things that you can try out if you're a dungeon master or a player trying to create new material and you're just having a rough time with it. But first off, I want to identify what exactly I'm talking about when I say writer's block, because I actually have noticed sometimes this term gets a little muddled. Now, first off, let's just call this creator's block instead of writer's block. There's artists of all kinds that go through this experience. Let's make it more inclusive. But I think the real distinction comes from a block and what I guess I would call a drought. A drought is when a creator just has no gas left in the tank. They're out of inspiration, they don't even know where to begin. This is blank page or blank canvas syndrome. A block, as compared to a drought, is just when you're in the process and something gets muddled. You just can't quite figure out this one character, this one scene, this one idea or concept. You get stuck in the middle of something and you just can't figure out how to go any further. I think it's important to distinguish these terms because the solution to them is different. If you're having a creator's drought, you just need inspiration. Watch a bunch of stuff. Go outside, walk around, talk to friends, work a weird job for a few months so you learn about that walk of life. That one's pretty intense, but if you're dedicated to your craft, you'll do it. You'll do it. A creator's block you can fix with just sort of quick stuff that gets you outside of the box that you're stuck in. So this video is just going to be 5 quick tips for that. If you're having creator's drought, I recommend you look somewhere else. But if you just need to look at the material that is in D&D with some fresh eyes because you're stuck on one particular thing, maybe this video will help you out. Tip number 1 comes from this bad boy. If you just flip through this book, you will be amazed at the things you find that you've kind of just not looked at in several months. But this particular idea is actually to take 2 completely random things and see what happens when you smoosh them together. There are combinations that you're probably used to at this point. A wizard with some merfolks, a goblin riding a warg, zombies and skeletons going together. But if you just flick and stop at 2 random pages and try to figure out how those 2 things would go together, a lot of times it just ends up kind of weird and poopy, but sometimes you land on gold. I had a player ask me after a one-shot once, how did you come up with that Medusa hook horror combination? It just makes so much sense. Like, she's able to control them, but they never turn into stone because they can't see her. But she's able to feed, like, the synergy is just so good. How did you come up with this? And I said, I flipped through the book randomly and went, oh. I could have pretended I was a genius, but I won't, because I'm here to help you. I'm here to give you these tips. Remember that. Number 2. Take out an old movie or maybe a book that you're pretty familiar with and have experienced a few times. Get a notebook next to you and try to figure out, if this was a D&D campaign, how would I do it? Now this one sounds a little weird, but what you get from this experience is looking at what your definition of encounter can really be. I mean, pretty much anything that is happening in a film in particular is some kind of encounter. A lot of them are social or exploration rather than combat, depending on the genre you're watching, but this can really broaden your horizons into the kind of situations that you can throw your players in. Furthermore, if you're having a little bit of trouble structuring your ideas and figuring out how to actually transfer them to your players session by session, this is a really good structure exercise, just as a bit of practice. The interesting thing about this exercise is that once you have these notes in front of you, however imperfect they are, you can now look at this film or book or whatever as the moving pieces that it actually is. And now it's something that reflects a campaign a little bit more. You can think, in this encounter, if it had gone differently, what could have happened to these characters? How could have things moved forward? And suddenly, you're thinking about story in a perspective that you probably haven't thought about it in quite some time. And if nothing else, by the end of this exercise, Maybe you have an encounter or a character or two that you pulled from this art that you were experiencing that you can just plop into your campaign somewhere. You don't have to tell your players that this entire dungeon was basically just that one scene from John Wick with fantasy monsters instead. I mean, you still made the encounter. You know what? Be proud of it. Number 3 is also related to structure. Pick a type of campaign that you have not run before, and just play with it for a little bit. A lot of us who have been doing anything for a while, but particularly D&D, we have tropes and patterns that we just kind of fall into. Character beats, styles of encounters, genres that we're pulling from, so on and so on. So I think sometimes it can be helpful to just dip into another one very briefly and see what you can actually pull from it, and if it gets the juices flowing again. You might think that you've done it all before, but just sit back and think about every genre of campaign that is possible. Have you run a heist campaign? Have you run a political intrigue campaign? Like, really, political intrigue front to back. Have you run a romance plot in your game lately? Is there something you can pull from that, even if you don't do an entire romance plot or heist movie or whatever, that can influence what you're doing now? And maybe looking at a different structure will inspire you to run an entirely new campaign. It certainly happened to me. I was not planning on running basically Oregon Trail the game until I realized, oh, I have really hardly touched overland travel and basic day-to-day exploration in any of these campaigns I've ever run. What would happen if I structured a game around it? It turned out pretty nice. Number 4. Another chunk of stuff from the material by Wizards of the Coast that you've probably not thought about for a while. We got a list of adventuring gear, and a few pages from it we have a list of tools, trinkets, random things your character might have, and so on. Now, you've probably glossed over these pages a few times making characters before, but a lot of these things have either been deemed useful, or not worth the space, or not worth the gold. So players tend to take the same ones again and again, and you kind of overlook all of the creative and roleplay possibilities that are in there. So my recommendation for number 4 is to take something from any of these tables that are in the player's handbook, and see if you can just make a character, or even make a setting, or a guild, or something like that, based on one of these items that is not commonly used. What would it look like to have a character who has an abacus in their inventory and frequently uses it as part of their decision-making and roleplay? What would it look like to have a character who has the glassblower's tool proficiency and seriously uses those tools often to create things that are useful for the party? What about somebody with a glass vial filled with nail clippings? You know what, don't do that. But the overall idea, please do. And 5. This is probably one of my favorite pieces of writing advice in general. Take a trope, change one thing. All creativity is in some ways derivative. It is a combination of elements that we have seen before, just not particularly in this way. I think sometimes we forget that, and a lot of us can get caught up in trying to make something completely unique, or be sitting there at the blank page waiting for something entirely new and fresh to just hit us. But sometimes it helps to just look at the cultural touchstones, the basic trope characters, and look at what elements of them there actually are that you can keep, and which ones you can play with. I think a show that does this very, very well is The Dragon Prince. You can see it on Netflix. It has some of the creative team from Avatar: The Last Airbender and Naughty Dog's Uncharted on it, which is just like... Almost all of their characters seem like they were built with this formula in mind, and I absolutely love it. Take Aunt Amaya, for example. This is basically just the heroic action hero, lawful good paladin that we've seen a million times over, but she's a mute woman. That's something we've not seen. That's a combination of elements that is fresh, and because of that, the character is sparking every scene she's in with life, because we're seeing things we've seen before, just coming from an entirely new person, and people respond to her differently because of that, and it's just good. It's just good. So maybe you find yourself stuck. You're sitting at the desk making another sorcerer because you need an ensorcerer for this encounter, and you think, ugh, every sorcerer I've made has been the same. Well, list them out. What did they have in common? Can you just change one thing about it? Does changing that one thing then ripple out to the rest of the character and make them more interesting? This piece of advice sounds too simple, but it really works if you pick the right thing and think about it for a second and, it's nice. I like it. I like this one. I like it. Please use it. Use it. So that's it from me, 5 quick tips about writer's block or creator's block. Hopefully this is a bit of a shorter video for me and just one that has some quick, nice advice in it, because I know I tend to go on and get way in the weeds, which we will be doing in the next few videos. This is not normal for me. I'm not good at keeping things short. See, even now I'm still I shouldn't be talking anymore. Well, I'm Mark J. Judge. This is a channel. There's other stuff on it. Cool. There are parts of me that I don't feel in control of sometimes.